Welcome to House Flipping 101. Now my goal for you is to help you to avoid the costly mistakes that I've made in the past decade and hundreds of houses flipped for either rent or for sale. I don't expect you to be an expert after this, but you should have a thorough understanding of the key concepts necessary to become a great house flipper. So let's get right into it. Now to really understand it, there are really only 4 steps when it comes to flipping a house. Step 1 is the deal. That's acquiring a property and getting the funding for it. Step 2, the strategy, making sure that you're doing the right things on that property, that you're gonna do the right things on that property. Step 3 is the work, actually executing the strategy that you've set out. And step 4, the market, taking it to the market for either sale or the rental market to maximize the profits. Now, all of that sits upon the foundation of understanding why you're here and what you're doing. And over the top of all of that, it is filtered through what I call the empire. And we're going to go through all of that today. So let's start with the foundation. So why real estate in the first place, as opposed to any of the other investments that you could make or anything else that you could spend your time on? Well, there's really 5 reasons. Number 1 is the history. Now you've heard of the invention of the wheel. I mean, we're talking about years BC. And one of the places that the wheel was invented is Mesopotamia. And when archaeologists dug up that civilization, what they found were these tablets that basically were real estate transactions, trading one person's land for another for a profit. The point here is that it's literally been around for thousands of years. This asset, this trading of the asset has been around for thousands of years. It's reasonable to believe that it's going to continue to be an asset that is profitable for us. Next is leverage. Well, not only do I believe that, but banks also believe that it's a safe asset to invest in. Therefore, banks will give you money to buy it. So instead of buying a $100,000 property with all of your cash, you can get the bank's money to buy that, or other investors like we're going to talk about once we talk about the deal. But just think about that versus stocks, for instance. If you want to buy a $100,000 stock, well, you need to come up with $100,000 cash. Next is it's universal. Now, when I thought about where I wanted to spend my career, I thought about what is the biggest thing that everybody needs. And that's where I came to real estate. See, everybody is going to need a place to live. Everybody either buys a property or they rent a property. Next is the control. Let's compare it to stocks once again. When you're buying a stock, you're basically buying a small piece of a company. Let's say like Amazon. Let's just say that you had a certain personal investment strategy that you were working on, and you would give Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, a call and say, hey, could you make these small tweaks so you could make the investment do what I want in my strategy? Right, not gonna happen. But with real estate, with your own 2 hands, you can go control the destiny of that property. And finally, it's a 2-in-1, like shampoo and conditioner. Not only can house flipping be your day job, what you wake up and do every day and what you bring in normal income doing, but it can also be your long-term investment strategy. And that takes us right along to why flipping. The same skills that you're going to develop for flipping houses, like learning how much a rehab is going to cost, learning how to project manage that rehab, learning how to find great deals, learning how to work with the people who maximize the profits on the back end, all these steps that we've talked about. Well, the same skills that you'll develop to do house flipping, you'll also develop to hold a long-term rental, because really the only difference between flipping a house and holding it for long-term is when you go flip a house, you sell it to the open market. Somebody buys the house to live in it. Whereas when you hold a house for rental, you sell it to the bank, is what we would call it. That means that you get an appraisal done on the property and a bank gives you a certain percentage of that appraised value in a long-term mortgage. The bank or something like it, which we'll ultimately talk about. Because the truth is the bank isn't really always the best place to get this money. Next Guys, it's future proof. Now, you think about the opposite being new building. Well, there's already machines and AI robots that are coming out and building houses from the ground up. It's a very process-driven type of operation. Therefore, it can be taken over. However, when you go buy a house off market that needs a certain type of rehab, each thing in that project is going to be different. It's never going to be the same. It's going to be very hard for a robot to be able to figure out how to do that. You would need a knowledge bank, which doesn't really exist. That's probably why you're watching this, because there's not really a knowledge bank that says these are the steps that you take every single time. So it's future proof. That means that if you put your blood, sweat, and tears into learning this trade, it will continue to pay off for years to come. Next is it's a door opener. You see, a lot of people don't learn how to do this, but they need people who know how to find great deals, know how to take care of and manage a rehab, know how to write the right scope of work for that rehab, all things that we're going to talk about today. They need somebody on the ground who can do that. And that has opened so many doors for me, for people who maybe have some more cash sitting around, but they don't want to get in there and do the dirty work. Maybe it opens the doors to different types of funding that you didn't know was possible. And now let's talk about safety or control, but it's actually going to help if we talk about this next concept. It'll help you understand why you have so much control when you're flipping houses. And this is a concept that you're going to need to understand throughout. So I actually have already drawn it on this other whiteboard because I have whiteboards all around this place. This is called the scale of livability. That's what we call it. Now, every neighborhood has houses that are bombed out. These are the houses that you probably need to gut, take down to the studs, or at least something close. It needs a heavy amount of renovation for anybody to ever live in it. This red mark right here, this is the line of livable. Once you get past that wall, that line of livability, now the house can be monetized. Somebody can buy it to live in, or they can rent it out from you. And then there are houses just on the other side of that line that we call barely bankable. These houses are outdated. They need a little bit of work to make them up to modern standards, but they are bankable, meaning a bank would actually lend money because it is a house that's monetizable today, meaning somebody can live in it. And then there's your range of comps. Now that's what everybody talks about when they're talking about the comps, what their house is going to sell for after it's been flipped. When people say flipped, they mean after it's been worked on, rehabbed. This is what your real estate agent is going to tell you the house would sell for when they run a comparative analysis for you. That's where the word comp comes from. When you are adding value to a house, you're a value add investor. You're taking a house from somewhere on the left side of this spectrum and moving it further to the right side. And you are in control of that, either with your own two hands if you're a DIYer, or by having subcontractors come in and force appreciation into that property. And that's what we say is forced appreciation. And that is safety, because if something goes wrong in there, you can personally, physically control what happens next. You may need to learn something to be able to control it, and that's where a lot of my learnings have come from, is that somewhere along the line of forcing appreciation into a property, I learned that I messed something up and I had to learn how to fix that thing. And you know, when I was starting out, didn't have a lot of money, so a lot of times I had to do those things myself. But this is a concept that we're going to revisit throughout this video and really anything that I do. So I'm going to set it right there. Now, let's get into the deal. The first and most important step is that you start with a great deal. When I started out as a real estate investor, I would buy houses off of the MLS, the multiple listing service. This is where a real estate agent would list a house. also referred to the market, or Zillow sometimes I might call it that. It's all really the same thing. If a house gets listed on the MLS, it's also listed on Zillow 99.9% of the time. And when I was starting out, like most people, I would only buy houses off of the market. But that is a huge problem, because those houses are always on the rightmost tip of each one of these blocks. They're trying to get as much money as they possibly can, because they got to pay a real estate agent, they got to pay all these other fees, and of course the real estate agent is always going to tell them that it can sell for more than it could, because that's how they're going to win their contract. We'll talk about that more later. And that means that I'm constantly overpaying for houses. And when I overpay for houses, the only way that I can really make that work is try to get work done for less, which that's not really achievable, as we'll talk about. Or I need to sell it for more, which we're also going to talk about. But the best thing that ever happened to me is I learned about wholesalers and buying houses off market. And when you buy a house off market, you generally buy the house for its true value, or sometimes even less. Now, what we're talking about in the spirit of having control over the investment is we're going to talk about how to go get those deals off market yourself, because that's how you're going to get the best deal. And when you start with a great deal, everything else gets easier. It gets easier to get the money to fund the deal and the rehab. It gets easier to do the rehab because you have more room for errors, which you'll make errors. I still make errors. And you'll have room to put it on the market at a safe price that gets you a profit. So you got to find the right property. Now, what is the right property? Well, the right property is in your backyard. And there's going to be people that get really mad about me saying this, and there'll definitely be pushback. But there's a lot of talk online about out-of-state investing, and you want to find the best market out there, and that's where you want to buy properties at. I call BS on that. I think that the most important thing for you as a real estate investor is your presence. Your presence to go check out the job, to get your own eyes on the property, to learn what's good and what's bad. There could be nothing more powerful. And if your market that you're actually in, the city that you're actually in, is stale, meaning that the prices are not appreciating, that's what I mean by a stale market, then you need to go out and look at markets that are within 2, maybe even 5 hours of where you live, and be willing to drive there and have a presence there, maybe once a week, maybe once a month, but something more than hardly ever going there. Now, within that market that you decide to buy in, you're going to find a couple of neighborhoods. Now, I say a couple because when you start out, we're going to actually market to these people, which we're going to talk about in a second. And you want to control the amount of marketing you do. You want to have really good marketing to a smaller amount of people so you can really get the most out of every dollar you spend. Now, as you grow, you might change your attitude on that. But starting out, you want to make sure that you are very focused on your marketing efforts. So we're going to pick just a neighborhood or maybe a few neighborhoods. Now, a neighborhood is really defined by its census tract. That's the way that I've always defined neighborhoods, and it's a great way to determine what is a neighborhood and where I'm going to market to. Now, also, major intersections, major roads really define a neighborhood. However, the census tract and the major roads really overlap each other. Now, inside of those neighborhoods, there are comparable houses, which you're also going to need to understand to be able to determine what the range of comps is. And when you're looking at what a comp is, you want to look at its features. Is it similar in size? Is the style similar? Is it one story? Is it two story? Next, you want to look at the date it sold, and you want to look at the proximity to the other houses that you're considering comps, which means, is it in the same neighborhood? Next, we need to find the right seller. So we're going to talk about marketing now. Outbound for inbound. I actually should have just wrote inbound, but I had already written outbound and I didn't want to waste a sheet of paper. So inbound marketing, you're going to send outbound mail, is what we send, to get calls coming in, because you don't want to waste your time trying to make people sellers that aren't sellers. And I know a lot of people do this. So cold calling, which we do some cold calling. I see a lot of people who will make calls and they're trying to convince people to sell their house. No, you want to get the ones that actually want to sell their house, and then you're going to work out a deal with them. They want to make their houses liquid, and you as an investor are going to help them do that. But convincing somebody to sell when they didn't really want to sell, it's really just going to eat up your bandwidth, and it's not worth your time. If you're doing good marketing, there will be people out there that are looking for you. They have a house that is in disrepair, and it needs somebody like you who is willing to take the risk to rehab that house and try to sell it for more money, value add investing. And they need you to liquefy that house, i.e. turn their asset into cash. That means that you want to get inbound callers, people who have decided, I want to sell my house and I want to sell to that type of person. Now, the best ways to do that for us is certainly mail. We send out a lot of postcards to people saying that we buy houses in cash, and we do pay-per-clicks on Google. Now, I mentioned cold calling. We do have cold calling services that we use, but I really filter through those leads pretty hard, meaning that if they don't really want to sell, it's not worth the time to try to convince somebody to sell. There used to be a lot of outbound text messaging, but the carriers have really shut that down, so that's not really an option anymore. You can also buy leads from other companies, which has sometimes been successful for us, but once again, going back to the theme of controlling things, because you just really can't rely on those sources of income of new leads. But sending out mail, pay-per-clicks, sometimes cold calling are all things that you have control of. Now, one other step is going through wholesalers. Wholesalers are people who find off-market deals and then they're going to sell it to you as a markup. In the current climate of the economy, it's almost just as expensive to buy a house from a wholesaler as it is off of the MLS itself. And so I haven't done a lot of that lately, and that is really where I moved to wanting to find my own deals. Next is a CRM, a customer relationship management system. It doesn't have to be complex, literally a spreadsheet that keeps all of the incoming leads together so you can keep following up with them with phone calls or whatever messaging you're doing. Now, sales comes down to two things. Most people think about the negotiation part, but it comes down to two things: negotiation and follow-up. And I've met some great salespeople who aren't great negotiators, but they're great with the follow-up. They get a lead in their system and they call them every week, every month, whatever their rhythm is, and they keep on it, because maybe they kind of want to sell, but they just can't get over the hump today, but maybe they can tomorrow. And you want to be the one that's there when they get over the hump. Home base. You also need to set up a home base for yourself. Now, we're going to talk about building authority and trust with a potential seller, but one of the biggest things that you want to do, you're competing against these people that come from out of state and they don't have a local presence. If you have a local presence, then you want to make sure that you have your address, your phone number with a local area code, and a website set up showing who you are. That's your home base. And actually, this is kind of out of order. You set up your home base, get your CRM, and then you send outbound for inbound. DOA. Now, there are some houses that I call dead on arrival that you just don't want to buy no matter how good of a deal it is. And I'm really going to break that down into three categories. One is that it's an odd bird. It doesn't fit with the rest of the houses in the neighborhood. something is a little bit off when it comes to the features, and it's just not worth buying. It's the same reason that I don't buy in rural areas, because there are not enough comps. Because what comps do for you is give you a statistical likelihood of what that house will sell for. So in the perfect world for me, I would be buying houses in Pleasantville. They all look the same, exactly the same. So if that house sold for $300,000, I know that if I get my house to that same shape, it is so likely that it will also sell for $300,000. Now, in a rural area, none of the houses are really the same. And they may have different amounts of land. They have all kinds of different features. Usually houses haven't sold that recently. And so you're really taking a guess. The statistical likelihood of what it will sell for has gone down tremendously. If a house in a neighborhood is an odd bird, meaning the things are different about it, well, the statistical likelihood of its sale price isn't what you might think. Next are easements and property line issues. There are some houses that are built too close to a property line or easements that run through that property. I just don't even mess with it, because you can work yourself through those zoning type of issues, parcel type of issues, but it takes a lot of your time, where I'd rather just focus my time on finding the next deal that is not weird. And finally, flood zones. When I say don't buy in a flood zone, I mean don't buy in a flood zone if it's not common for houses to be in a flood zone. For instance, like in Florida, a lot of those houses are in a flood zone. So all of the houses in the neighborhood are in a flood zone. Therefore, people are used to getting the flood risk insurance and all that. But when you buy a house that's in a neighborhood where some of them are in a flood zone and most of them aren't, just avoid it. It is going to decrease the value in a way that you can't overcome. Same thing with 7-foot ceilings. I never buy a house with 7-foot ceilings. It never appreciates like the other properties. All right, next, close the deal. All right, this is where you're actually talking with a potential seller. Now, there is a lot that we could go into here, and we have done full trainings on how to close the deal, but I'm going to break it down to just a few things. All right, first, let's talk about authority. Authority comes down to 3 things. One is your rapport. How well do you get along with them? How well do you vibe with them, let's say? Next is the trust. Do they believe that you will attempt to do the things that you have said that you're going to do? And 3 is expertise. Do they believe that you have the ability to do the things that you said you're going to do? Building those things is a much deeper conversation than we can get into right now. But next you have your walkthrough, where you actually walk through the property, and that's where you're going to build a lot of this authority, because you are going to know how to write a rehab scope of work, and you're going to talk to them about what you're doing. You're going to speak to them in a way that gets them to open up about the true reasons that they're trying to sell the property. And that way, when you sit down with them at the negotiation table after the walkthrough, you can show them the calculation of how you came to the price that you're able to give them, and they'll believe why you got there, because you're actually going to use math to get there. But the calculation is pretty simple. I'm not going to go through the specifics of the calculation. We actually have a calculator out there that we use to derive our acquisition number, but there's a simple rule that they talk about out there, the 70% rule. You take 70% of the after repair value, and then you subtract out what it's going to cost to rehab the property. So let's just say that it was going to sell for $300,000. Well, 70% of $300,000 is $210, and then you subtract out, let's say, a $50,000 rehab. Now we're at 160. You would pay $160,000 for that property. That's the simple math. We use a little bit more robust calculator, but it is pretty similar to the 70% rule. All right, next, get that cash. Now, a lot of people think that they're going to go to the bank to get this cash, and really, this is what stops a lot of people from wanting to get into this industry, because they think that they're not going to have the ability to get that money. Well, I'll tell you, the bank is like the worst place to get money to do these types of properties. See, a bank wants to lend on a property that is livable, barely bankable, but you are generally going to be buying houses that are on the wrong side of livable so you can add value to them, force appreciation through your rehab. Therefore, banks don't want to give you money, and even if they did, it's a really bad situation because a bank on an investment property is going to give you 80% of the purchase price. So let's just say that you purchase that property for $100,000. They'll give you $80,000 to purchase it. You still have to come up with the funds for the rehab, and that might be $50,000, $60,000. That's a lot of cash that you have to bring out of pocket. Now, banks do have commercial lending options, but basically with a commercial lending option, what they're going to do is they're going to take the acquisition price, the $100,000 plus the $60,000 rehab, and then they'll give you maybe 80% of that. But you still have to come up with 20% of that large number, which is really difficult for a lot of people to do. That's where we get to different things like hard money lenders. Hard money lenders are companies that are set up to lend on properties just like the ones we're talking about. And they're available to anybody who gets a good deal on the front end. Now, as you move up, you might have private investors. This is where you go raise money from people, private citizens who have cash. And then there is one more upgrade that I call like a private hard money lender, which is really a small business type of hard money lender. They are generally house flippers that have graduated, so to speak. They have their own money or maybe family's money or maybe they've raised money, but it's generally that person that you're talking to is also the one that makes the decisions on whether they lend or not. Whereas with a hard money lending company, it's generally more corporatized. So there's a bureaucracy and you're really talking with a loan officer, not the person who has the money, as with what I call the private hard money lender. And that's really what we use a lot of. We do raise money for private investors, but I really like the private hard money lending option better. You pay a little bit more, but that's what they do for a living. And I'm going to leave it at that to not get too complex. But the point is, there are ways to get money as long as you have the deal. And the more experience you gather with finding deals and knowing how to rehab them, it's going to get easier and easier to get money to the point where people will want to give you money. And then that's where partnerships start to come into play. Now, let's move to step 2. We've acquired the deal. We've gotten the money for the deal. Now, step 2 is the strategy. Now, just like you run comps to figure out what a house will sell for, you also run comps for a renovation. So you look at these houses that are in the range of comps and you figure out, did they re-roof the houses or are the roofs a little bit older? Do they have granite countertops, quartz countertops, or are they doing butcher block? Maybe they're doing Formica countertops in that neighborhood and that's what's selling for the most. What about the cabinets? Are they soft close shaker cabinets? Or are they the cabinets that you get off the shelf at Home Depot? Or are they the original cabinets that are just painted? What about the floors? Is it LVP or is it hardwoods? What about the bathrooms? Are they doing tub shower surrounds or are they doing nice tiled showers? You got to figure out what the finishes are in that neighborhood. And that's how you comp out your renovation. You don't want to get into where you're over renovating. Now, so there are 4 levels. There are 4 levels of building a scope of work. The scope of work is basically all of the jobs that you're going to do on that house. Are you going to do framing? Are you going to do mechanical, electrical, plumbing? What are you going to do with mechanical, electrical, plumbing? Are you putting in LVP floors or are you putting in hardwood? That's what a scope of work is. And there are 4 levels to building this scope of work. First is the safety and liability level. So no matter what property you do, you need to cover safety and liability. Otherwise, you are a slumlord or a corner cutter. You know, there are flippers out there that you hear about that hide stuff inside of walls and such, and then somebody buys it and it's a terrible story for them. Well, you definitely don't want to be that person. So safety and liability things, you want to make sure that those are covered no matter what you're doing. Next is you want to stop any bleeding. Bleeding mostly means water getting into the property, because when a house is bleeding, that means it's getting worse every single day. So you need to make sure that you stop those things up. Now, next is the baseline. Now, this goes back to the comping, a renovation, comping the houses in the neighborhood. Now, the baseline means that instead of going here, I want to go here. I want to do the baseline. If some houses have granite, but some have butcher block is lesser value than granite, well, I'm going to go with the butcher block. If some houses have LVP and some houses that are selling in the range of comps have hardwood floors, I'm going with the LVP. I'm going with the baseline of each one of these things, because the biggest mistake that you can make as a house flipper is dealing with what I call the HGTV dilemma, where you think every house needs to be some big design project, every house needs to be something glorious when it's all done, that you need to push every house to the top end of the range of comps and even push it beyond. Well, no. I used to do some crazy rehabs. I used to make the best house on the block every time and try to sell it for the most money I possibly could, until the day I couldn't. Until the day I lost $200,000 on one rehab project. I built the prettiest thing that you'd ever seen. I did a pop top. I took the roof off, built a second story, built a 3-car garage. I did everything you could think of, a 2-story indoor waterfall. And the market changed on me. I swung for the fences with this home run, and I came up way short. And at the same time, there's this guy across the street who, he bought this house and he did all of the work himself. Basically, he hired some subs for some certain things, but he did no pop top. He didn't build a 3-car garage. I don't even think he painted the exterior of the house. And he ended up making a 6-figure profit on the same flip that I lost $200,000 on. He was in and out in 3 months. I was there for over a year, and I ended up having to fire all the subs on the job and do the work myself because I had run out of money. And I got to that job site every day and got to watch what that guy was doing. And I decided that after that, I was never, ever going to make the same mistake again, because, guys, we're not HGTV. They can do that, and people will buy their houses because it's an HGTV house. But they even make their money from being a media company, not from being a house flipper. And I see so many people get in the game, people that we've done work for, clients of ours, who try to do the same thing. They want to be some type of designers, thinking that that's the way you flip houses, and they end up going out of business. And I don't want the same thing for you guys. So it's about finding the baseline. Now, we are going to do some tricks to push us past the bottom of this range of comps. We're actually going to do some different psychological hacks to push the property from the bottom of this range of comps to the middle, or sometimes even the top, but we're not going to spend big money to do it. We'll get to that though. Next, we have chunking. Now, before you buy that property, while you're creating the strategy for what you're going to do, you need to do what we call chunking. And that means that it's not a project with all of the jobs just in a row, one after the next after the next. You need to think about who you're going to have do that work. Is it going to be you? Is it going to be another subcontractor? What type of subcontractor, which we're going to get into the types of contractors. But you need to chunk that work into groupings of jobs that you can easily manage. That's what chunking is. Next, we're going to make media packets. So we're going to take pictures, we're going to take video, we're going to have written scopes of work that we can hand out to these subs or manage personally, that really spell out exactly what your vision is. Because as a real estate investor, your main job is to cast a vision for what you expect that property to look like. Next, let's move into step 3, the work. As I mentioned, there's 3 different types of contractors. There's the job-specific contractor, specific job contractor as we call them. I think this is probably what a lot of people think of. The person that just does roofing, they just do electrical or just plumbing. They maybe are painters or a flooring company. Now, these guys are generally very efficient at the thing that they do, but it's not always the best to hire just specific job contractors because that's a lot of management. You need to manage a new contractor, write a new scope for each specific contractor that comes on. Now, we do use those, but not for everything. Next, you have an all-arounder. Now, an all-arounder, they will do the floors, they'll do the cabinets, they'll do the carpentry, they'll do the roofing, they'll take out the trash if that's what you hire them to do. They can do everything, but they do nothing great. Like a specific job contractor is very good at the trade that they do, whereas an all-arounder is kind of okay at everything. Now, third, you have what we call handyman. Now, a handyman might not be like the handyman company that you think of. A handyman is an all-arounder type that can do everything, but they're good at all of it. The problem is they're very expensive. Now, our handyman for us are internal crew members. We actually hire guys that are very good at all of the things. They can do mechanical, electrical, plumbing, they can do structural work, they can do anything that any of these guys can do. The way that we use them as a bottleneck breaker. They make sure that jobs keep moving along, or it's something like a structural issue comes up and that would be really expensive to hire a specific job company to come in that only does structural work. They'll overcharge you like crazy. And so we have handyman crews for just that. That would be a little bit too much for an all-arounder to do. But the meat and potatoes of the way we operate rehabs are through all-arounders. These guys that can do a little bit of everything, and they're not great at anything. But remember, we're going for the baseline. We're not trying to overdo anything, except for when we get to the psychological hacks. Next, we have the recruiting pipeline. Now, I underlined pipeline, and that was for a reason, because a lot of people don't think about it this way, but the contractors and other vendors that you have, but specifically contractors, are the lifeblood of your organization. I mean, that is what makes these things get done. Deals and contractors. Therefore, you need to treat it just like any other sales pipeline, any other CRM, customer relationship manager, where you get somebody into your CRM, you go out in the streets and you meet these people and you get them into your spreadsheet, and then you follow up with them. And finally, you ultimately work them to where they come and bid a job for you. And you're always constantly thinking about the relationship capital with them, which we'll get into when we get into the empire. But the things that overarch your whole enterprise. All right, it's a pipeline. It's not, I just met a guy, I'm gonna get him to bid that job. No, you're constantly following up with these people. No accountability without expectations. This is huge. A lot of people get an outcome that they don't like and they complain about it, they get mad about it, and maybe they go yell at the contractor. I see this guy on the media that his whole channel is about him basically chewing out contractors, and it kind of pisses me off because really, unless you have done a phenomenal job of setting expectations, and that's why we have our media packets, that's why we have our chunking, you clearly define what the vision is. You clearly define what you expect the finished product to look like. Now, if you have done that without a shadow of a doubt, then you can hold ruthless accountability, and you should. And what that means is that you pay the contractor when they get done. But if you have not set clear expectations, it's kind of just as much on you or more on you that you didn't get the outcome you wanted. Therefore, you need to go pay that contractor. Now, if you have been very clear, written, and visually about what you want and it's still not done, then you hold accountability. And you need to do both of those things to be a successful project manager, to successfully get the work done like you want, like you set out in your strategy. You need to be great at setting expectations, and you have to have the cojones to hold the accountability necessary because you guys totally agreed upon it. if you set expectations well. Now, let's move to step 4, the market. The first question is, do you sell it for sale by owner, or do you use a real estate agent? Now, I'm definitely a believer in being blue collar and DIYing things. And, I grew up in this business by doing a lot of the work myself, because that's how I was able to create a gap with the finances, how I was able to get things done for less because I didn't have to pay labor. Therefore, it would seem that for sale by owner would make sense. I would save the money in selling the property. However, there's a couple different things. One is that a great agent can really get you more for that property. That's one. Two is that there's a lot of bandwidth, a lot of phone calls to answer and all that, and it's easily farmed out to a vendor like a real estate agent that is used to dealing with that and has the processes to deal with that. However, and then you can focus your bandwidth on things that are more important, like finding the next deal or project managing or setting up clear, concise scopes of work that are not over renovating like HGTV. But you got to find a good agent. And that's the problem for a lot of people, is that they think that they have a good agent, but not all agents are created equal. In fact, most agents aren't good at all. Just because they got their real estate license does not mean that they understand how to be a real estate agent for investors, and it does not mean that they're going to go to bat for you, because they're getting their percentage no matter what. And if you sell your house for $20,000 less, it doesn't affect their paycheck all that much, but yours might make all the difference. So you really need somebody who is a pit bull, who is going to get in there and negotiate at every corner for you. One that is not going to be worried about the establishment that is real estate agents. They're not going to be worried about hurting another real estate agent's feelings because of the establishment of real estate agents. They're going to be focused on what they should be focused on, and that's getting the best deal for you, even if it does mean that they're going to rub a couple people the wrong way. And those are hard to find. But when you find one that truly is willing to go to bat for you, it makes all the difference. Now, the third reason is, and we're going to get right into psychological hacks with this one, is that what you are trying to do as a seller of a property is to create the right filter in which people see the property through. Just like you put filters on pictures that you throw on Instagram. It makes it look better than it might actually be. Or it shows it in its best light, showing how good it actually is. Let's say that instead. So the first filter that you might put on a house is the for sale by owner filter. And that filter is terrible. It says that this is a person that's cheap and the house is cheap. It says that I can get a deal because I'm dealing with somebody who's a novice. That's what that filter says to most people, and you do not want that filter on the house. Now, there are options to make it look like it's a real estate agent that's listing it, but I'm not going to get into that here. So the next psychological hack is the big three. So we alluded to that earlier when we talked about the 4 levels of the scope of work. Now, we talked about how you got to hit the baseline. However, when you're getting ready to sell a house or rent a house, you need to think about the way that people are going to approach the property, how they're going to literally drive through the neighborhood and see your house first, and then what door they're going to go into the house in and what they're going to see first. And we like to take the first 3 things that they're going to see. The first one is generally going to be the curb appeal of the front door and the area around it, the landscaping, maybe some nice features around the front door or on the front porch. But something to think about here is, are they actually going to approach the house from the front and go into the front door? There are some houses that we've done where people would naturally go into the side door, and therefore we do curb appeal on the side door, not necessarily the front of the house. Next, when they open that front door or whatever their entry door is, what are the first couple things they see? Is there a bathroom just left? Is that where they're naturally going to walk first? Well, if that's the case, you don't want to do the baseline. Even if the rest of the houses in the neighborhood are just doing those shower inserts, you might want to tile that shower instead, because it's one of the first few things that they're going to see. Are they going to see a kitchen? Well, if they're going to see a kitchen, Formica, like the rest of the neighborhood's doing, might not do. Maybe you want to upgrade to butcher block here, or even granite, because it's one of the first few things. It's the big three things that they see that create the filter in which they see the rest of the house. Because my belief is that within the first few seconds of pulling up to a house and entering the house, you've made a decision whether you're going to buy that house or not. Now, the rest of the walkthrough is about not unselling them. So if you had something that was really terrible in the back third of the house, you might make them second think actually buying the house. But you're certainly not going to put something in the back third of the house that is so good, it's going to convince them to buy a house that they didn't already like. Next is the finish line, or the it feels wrong. Contractors, especially, we talked about all-arounders, they're going to be on your job site most of the time. So they've seen it all the way from the beginning to the end in a lot of cases. And maybe you have too, especially if you're a DIYer. And when you're looking at the finished product, what you're doing is you're comparing it to the beginning product, and it looks great in comparison to that. But you got to realize that the buyer that walks through your property, or the renter that walks through your property, they only see it for what it is now. They don't have the comparison to how crappy it was, how bombed out it was when you bought it. Therefore, what happens a lot of times is that there are little things that aren't done, that aren't 100% done. Maybe you missed some caulking on some trim. Maybe there's some paint on some hinges. Maybe the doors don't open quite right. But to you, or the contractor that's been on it, you're like, huh, way better than what it was when I bought it. But to the buyer, they think, ooh, looks like they cut corners. And if they cut the corners that I could see, they probably cut the ones inside the wall. But actually, that's not even what happens. What happens is they walk through, they're probably not able to explain those things because they're not in the business. They just know that something feels wrong about this house. And typically, a professional could put those things into a tangible list. And it's things like paint on the door hinges, doors don't open properly, the transitions are weird. Sometimes what you need to do is get a fresh set of eyes on it, and a real estate agent can really help you with this because they haven't seen it from start to finish. And I know that a lot of people, especially new to the game, I was one of these, I wanted to show people the before pictures of the house so they could see how awesome it was. That's not going to do anything to sell your house. In fact, that will unsell your house. If somebody can see how gross it was, they're not going to want to buy that house. Next is the digital introduction. Now, this is the first thing that people see when they're going to buy your house. We talked about the approach to the house and the neighborhood, and we talked about the walkthrough and stuff, but actually the first thing they see are the pictures online. They read the listing description. They see the price. The price determines who sees the property in the first place. When you're out shopping for a property, you're going to say, I want to buy a house between $200,000 and $230,000. So pricing is the first part of the digital introduction. Let's just take the example of this person that is looking from 2 to 230. You have a house that should be worth about 180, but you list it too high at, let's say, 215. Well, now that 200 to 230 person saw that, but they're actually looking for houses that are worth $200 to $230,000. That means that your house is going to be the worst one they see every day when they go out shopping for houses. They're never going to buy the worst house that they saw. Therefore, your house sits on the market. And when your house sits on the market, people start to wonder, ooh, what's wrong with this one? You've just given it a negative filter. And that's the last thing that you want to do. Now, if you price it too low, people say that it will ultimately sell for what its market price is. Sometimes, if there's enough buyers in that specific market and price point, but I would say try to price it just right in the range of comps. And your real estate agent should be able to help you with that. That's the first part of the digital introduction. The next is the pictures. Don't be taking pictures on your iPhone. Have the best quality photographer you can possibly have. Show that property in the right light. And not only that, you need to think about how you want people to walk through the property. That's what we did with the big three. You're thinking about guiding people through the property in the right way. Well, you need to do the same thing with the pictures. You need to show it in the correct order, the order that you want them to see that property in, because you're starting to create the filter just with this digital introduction. And finally, the third part of the digital introduction is the listing description, the copywriting. Copywriting is written word that gets people to take an action. What is the action that you want here? Is for them to set up a showing so they can see your big three. Now, people get really lazy on this. If you ever have a real estate agent that starts the listing description with "Welcome to 123 Main Street," fire them immediately. They are being lazy about the copywriting, which is arguably the most important part of the whole process. The digital introduction, the first thing, the first introduction they're going to have to your property, the first filter that's going to be created. So you want to write copy in that listing description that makes people feel themselves in the house, feel like what you want them to feel when they walk through that house. All right, that's it. Now you've flipped your first property and you're rich. So let's talk about the empire, the overarching tactics or strategies over your whole organization. And just a few things that I want to talk about. One is the idea of relationship capital. And this is how you treat all of the vendors on or off your project, anybody that you run into. You want to think about the emotional savings account is what we talk about here. Every time you do right with them, you're adding currency to the emotional savings account. Every time you go choose somebody out, every time you treat them wrong, you're pulling money out. And you want to make sure that you always have a strong relationship capital savings account. That does not mean getting walked on. That doesn't mean not holding accountability, because it's okay to hold accountability if you've set expectations. In fact, I don't think that's withdrawing anything from your emotional savings account. But to go take out your frustrations because you didn't set good expectations, well, that's definitely draining your bank account. So you need to be thinking about those things in every interaction that you have, because when you build strong relationships with the vendors that you're working with, it helps over time. They understand what your strategies are. They're going to understand your vision. When you have to constantly run through new vendors, it's going to make things very hard on you. It's going to steal your bandwidth. Next, let's talk about financial contingency. Now, we talked about getting cash for a deal. We've even, maybe not in this video, but other times talked about how to be $0 down for a deal. But being $0 down does not mean having $0. You need to always have a financial contingency in the bank, because things are going to go wrong. The economy is going to turn on you. The things on the rehab are going to expand. You're maybe going to see an opportunity that you want to take advantage of. And if you are constantly working with your back against the wall, meaning you have no funds, you have no cash reserves, you are constantly going to be making the wrong decision. You're going to be making decisions all with getting to the next paycheck instead of doing what's right for the project. So make sure that you always have strong cash reserves. Be in a position of strength. And finally, let's talk about managing yourself. There's a few things I want to talk about here. Number one is building a TEM. A TEM. There's supposed to be an A there. Building a team, quote unquote. A lot of people talk about how you want to build a team of advisors, and that is correct, but you know, a real estate agent, different general contractors maybe that you work with, the different lenders and different people that you work with in your organization. But I just want to reiterate this, that it is your organization, not their organization, which means that they're going to be focused on their organization. Your company is just a part of their organization or their world. So you need to understand that, yes, you need to work with great advisors and you need to build a great team. But at the end of the day, you are the manager of those people. You are the one that needs to make sure things are right for your organization. And don't ever forget that, because I certainly have at times. Next, focus your bandwidth. There are so many things that everybody is going to tell you that you need to do all the time, and it gets very confusing, but you really need to focus on just a few things. I call this the all-weather approach to investing in real estate. Number one, you've got to get great deals. Getting great deals makes all of the difference. Number two, you need to constantly be leveling up your vendors. You need to constantly be out there recruiting new contractors, recruiting new wholesalers, recruiting new all vendors. You constantly, as your company gets better, it's because of the vendors that you work with. Three, you need to become a great project manager, and that means becoming phenomenal at setting clear and concise expectations and having what it takes to hold accountability to those things. And finally, in no particular order, building smart scopes of work, not over renovating properties. Building scopes of work that make sense for that property. If you do those four things, you will be successful. If you focus your bandwidth on those four things and not get confused by the rest, you will be successful. And finally, it's the mindset. Now, I too want to get there, wherever there is, today. But real estate takes time, as most great things do. I don't think there is a get-rich scheme out there that actually works. So you need to hunker down, you need to focus, but if you focus on these things, this is an industry that works. It does make people wealthy. Real estate always works. You just got to stick to it. You got to have the persistence. You got to have the grit. And I'm always reminded of a time early in my career when I was going out trying to find off-market deals, and I was going to an appointment. He owned 50 properties, and I realized there was no mortgages on any of these 50 properties. This guy's filthy rich. 50 properties, maybe $300,000 each. You can do the math. And so I was excited to meet this guy. Of course, I wanted to buy one of his houses, but more excited to meet this guy and figure out what the secret was to his success. And I pull up to the property and I'm waiting for this guy. He's like 5 minutes late, 10 minutes late. And I noticed that there's an HVAC technician in the parking lot or in the driveway. And so I finally go and knock on this guy's window and I'm like, hey, I'm looking for X, Y, and Z. Don't want to say the guy's name. And he goes, oh, that's me. And I was like, I didn't believe him first because this is an HVAC technician, but finally, I walked the property with him, and afterwards, I don't end up getting the deal, sorry, but afterwards I'm like, dude, how did you get 50 properties all in cash? He said, oh, you'll never believe it. My neighbor selling his house, this is like 30, 40 years ago. I said, how much you want for it? And he gave me a price, and I went to the bank, and I said, hey, will you give me this money to buy this guy's house? Sure enough, they gave me the money. And then I just put a tenant in that property and I took the money they paid me every month and I paid the mortgage with it. And then somebody else was selling a house, so I did the same thing, went down to the bank and they gave me the money to buy it and I put a tenant in it and I just took the tenant's money and I paid the mortgage with the tenant's money. And then I did that about 48 more times, and then after 30 years, all those mortgages were gone, the bank was paid off, and now I own the properties. Yeah, I know. It's that simple. So guys, the only thing stopping you from being like Mr. XYZ is getting started.